Hello, I'm Stephen Farris and welcome to my channel, At Home with the Bible. We're mostly at home somewhere this spring of the virus. It's a strange spring, isn't it? On our website that I visit frequently, they give a daily text from the Bible to consider for the day. And a couple of days ago, that text for me was Philippians 4, 6-7. Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Don't worry about anything. Advice from the Apostle Paul. It's a spring of worry as well as a spring of the virus, isn't it? There really is so much to worry about. The disease itself, what it might do to us, what it might do to those whom we love. There are all the hard and difficult economic consequences. There are all the changes to our social patterns, and most of them make us worry. And in many ways, it makes sense to worry. But Paul says to us, do not worry. Do not be anxious about anything. Hard advice to follow. Now, I really ought to warn you, I'm going to talk about New Testament Greek grammar for the moment. And I'm sure you clicked on this channel to get a little New Testament Greek grammar, didn't you? But here it is. There is something unusual about imperatives in New Testament Greek, whether they're positive commands, do this, or negative commands, don't do that. The imperative in Greek can appear in two different tenses. One of them the present tense, just like our English forms, do not worry. Another is an aspect of the Greek verb called the aorist. This case is the former, and it makes a difference in meaning. Back when I first studied New Testament Greek almost half a century ago, my instructors told me that there was a difference in meaning between the two. One would mean, do not start worrying, and the other would mean, stop worrying. The aorist means, do not start worrying. The present tense means, stop worrying. Stop doing something that you're doing already. Well, in this case, it's the latter. It's the present tense. And in all honesty, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? If somebody says to us, don't start worrying, our answer might quite reasonably be, don't start worrying, that's too late. I've been worrying for a long time already. But that's not what the text says. The text uses the present imperative. Don't continue to do something you're doing already. Well, that's a good and interesting distinction, and I think it's a valuable one, but it's not quite fully accurate. It doesn't say the whole truth about Greek imperatives, nor about this Bible text. And therefore, it doesn't say completely what the text is trying to get through to us. Stop worrying isn't quite what the New Testament Greek has to say to us. Now, sometimes the distinction really does work. It works in a Bible text that you may have heard read in the Christmas season, the appearance of the risen Jesus to Mary Magdalene. Mary is in the garden. She doesn't recognize Jesus at first, thinks that he's the gardener, and says, well, sir, where have you put the body? And Jesus replies, Mary, and she recognizes him. And Jesus says, do not touch me. That's the traditional translation. And there have been many wildly speculative interpretations from that. But really, it's the present tense. Mary is already holding him, and Jesus is saying, let go. Do not hold on to me, is the kind of translation that you see more often nowadays, or don't cling to me. We can picture Mary perhaps with something like a football tackle grip around Jesus' knees. She's so astounded. Well, Jesus has something to do to go to the Father, and so does Mary, because Jesus sends her to tell the disciples. That makes Mary, by the way, the first apostle, the first one who is sent to tell about the risen Christ. Well, the distinction works, therefore, in that passage about Mary, but it's not really quite complete in this one. Those experts on New Testament Greek grammar, on Greek grammar in general, say that the present tense, the tense that appears here, has what they call adjurative character. Adjurative character, that's just a fancy word for something that keeps on happening. So don't keep on worrying. A paraphrase might be, don't get trapped in a cycle of worry. Don't worry all the time. Don't worry constantly. Don't live in a state of worry. Any of those paraphrases get at the meaning of the text, I think. And that's the advice for us in this spring of 2020. Don't get trapped in a cycle of worry. Don't keep on worrying. Don't let worry be the chief characteristic of your life. Don't get trapped in your worry. Well, I think that makes a lot of sense. But of course, it's pretty difficult, isn't it? Stop worrying. Or don't get trapped in a cycle of worry. It is easier said than done, isn't it? Well, Paul gives a little further advice to his friends in the Philippian church. This is what he tells them. Do not worry about do not worry or keep on worrying about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Don't keep on worrying about everything, but do keep on praying. A burden shared is a burden to have. A burden shared with God in prayer is a burden made possible to carry. So don't worry about everything, but pray about everything. Of course, prayer can often be a characteristic of worry. In our prayers, we think, once again, of our family, of our own health, of our economic circumstances or the economic circumstances of those whom we love. And if we only think about the subject of our worries, perhaps it can become yet another way of being trapped in the cycle of anxiety, in the cycle of worry. Paul says something a little bit different. Paul says, pray about everything, but he says, with thanksgiving. The advice here is not simply to pray constantly, to pray without ceasing, though that is good advice and is said elsewhere in the text. It's to pray, but to pray with thanksgiving. Experts on the development of human happiness say that one of the characteristics of happy people is that they count their blessings. My way of phrasing it, not the psychologist's way of phrasing it. They count their blessings. They pray with thanksgiving, remembering the good things that have been given to them. There are indeed many things to be thankful about, as well as to worry about these days. If you have a family to worry about, you also have a family to love. That's worth thanking God for, in my opinion. If you're worried about finances, that makes sense. But God has reached out and blessed us in so many different ways. One other thing might be to pray with supplication. That means asking God for things, not for others. Pray for, not for ourselves. Perhaps we should pray first for others. For example, my wife and I went shopping today, and there are so many people putting themselves out on the front line to make it possible for us to get our daily bread. The truck drivers whom we can't even see, the people who work in the food warehouses, the farmers and the manufacturers and the processors, the cashiers who put themselves at risk to take our money to pay for those groceries. So many people, and by the way, so many of them are paid minimum wage or near minimum wage. We depend a great deal upon the carefulness and the industry and the hard work of people whom we reward with very low incomes. Worth thanking God for? I think so. Worth praying for, to God with supplication? I think that's true also. Or what about those people in the hospitals? And not just the doctors and nurses, the ones who deliver the food from room to room, the ones who clean the hospital, the ones who carry out the medical tests. A whole swarm of people to thank God for. A whole crowd of people to pray to God for. So pray with thanksgiving. Let your supplications be made known to God. But if you pray with thanksgiving for all those other people, if you pray for their welfare, their health, for the economic welfare of the thousands and thousands, indeed millions, who have lost their jobs due to this illness, if you pray for the people in distant countries who have so few of the advantages that those of us who live in the West almost take for granted, even in a time of pandemic, somehow our worries, our anxieties become smaller. And it may indeed be possible not to be trapped in an ongoing cycle of anxiety and of worry. And what can happen then? Well, Paul says that our hearts and our minds will be kept. They'll be guarded. It's not that nothing bad can ever happen to us. Bad things happened to Paul, bad things happened to Paul's friends, bad things happened to the church in Philippi to whom Paul was writing. Bad things do happen to good people. But our hearts and our minds are in the keeping of one who protects us and grants us what Paul calls a peace that passes all understanding. And back to Greek. Peace that passes understanding. That's present tense too. A peace that keeps on surpassing. A peace that continues to surpass all our understanding of the goodness of God and the love of God, which no virus can ever take away. So by all means, don't worry. By all means, don't get trapped in a cycle of worry and don't keep on worrying. But instead, pray to God, making your supplications and desires known to God, not just for yourself, but for others. And always with thanksgiving. And the peace of God will keep on surpassing our capacity for understanding. And will keep our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. Thanks be to God.